So I am like anxiety with capital A. But the thing is that when the one thing that you never planned for happens in your life and you don't just survive it, you thrive through that process, you just kind of go release.
Welcome to Where's My Money? One man, $1 million of debt, one podcast to find a way out.
Welcome to Where's My Money, the podcast for, well, anyone really. Anyone who wants to understand how money works, why we are how we are with money, and what it does to our brains, and what it can do to our relationships. In season 1, we hit the topic of divorce and how it can really chuck a curveball into your day-to-day life, but also your finances and your financial plans for the future. In this episode, we're going there again. This time, getting right into the nitty-gritty. It's a story of broken hearts, big question marks, and astounding financial success. Just a reminder, this pod isn't here to replace any financial advice. We can't take your own personal circumstances into account. We recommend you seek guidance from a trusted financial advisor, strategist, or coach. Let's go. Behind the scenes of the pod, we work really closely with our mates at Enable Me. One of the head honchos and someone who is a dead set legend to work with is Karla Byrnes. She's the head of brand at Enable Me and is someone who went through a heck of a divorce and wanted to share her story so that others who might find themselves in her situation can breathe a sigh of relief knowing you can make it through. In fact, you can come out in better shape than you were before. So, meet Karla. Grab some tissues and get ready to hear all about her divorce.
I think the thing that sort of struck me when I was starting to think about this is it takes a long time to be ready to kind of talk about it. And I think it's really interesting because life changes in a moment and you always think that you're not going to be the person that's life changes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece that kind of completely and utterly threw me, because you kind of hear all the time that people kind of go, like, my life changed and I just didn't see it coming, and that is totally what happened to me.
Because we're constantly watching it happen to everyone else.
To everyone
right?
else.
Yeah.
Like, that's everybody else's story, but it's never your story. And so I still vividly remember it like it was yesterday that I got on a plane to go to Australia because my sister had had her first baby. And whilst I was over there, I got two kind of life-changing calls. The first was my daughter rang me and kind of confirmed my worst nightmares, that she was suffering with anorexia. And then the next day, my husband and partner of 25 years rang me and said, I'm not happy and I don't want to be in this anymore. And I sort of said to him, like, what does that actually mean? And he was like, I don't know. And I remember kind of thinking, how do I get on the plane? And how do I even begin to unpack this? And it's kind of really weird because it's like 3 years ago and I know that I'm fine now, but even now it brings up so much trauma, like thinking about it, because it kind of unpacks probably like the worst 6 months of my life that I ever had to live through, because I kind of have to think about like, I kind of like had to force myself to get back on that plane, and I had to think about, you know, what do you save? Do you save your child? Do you try and save your marriage? How do you save a marriage when somebody's out the door but you sort of still feel like an obligation to it?
Yeah. Like,
it was easier to think about not having to go through it. But I think as a person, I was like, this can be a story of, it can be a story of kind of how you give up, or it can be a story of like redemption and how you move on. And I was really determined that I would show my two daughters how I could make a difference. And I think someone along the way on that journey said to me, they were amazing, and they rang me every single day. And I said to them, like, you've been amazing, because she'd been through it too. And she said to me, you help those that come after you. And so that's why it's really important for me to talk through this.
It's really, I'm on the verge now of tears as well.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that anyone who knows me knows that I'm an incredibly, I'm a really stoic person.
You're a no bullshit kind of gal.
I'm a no bullshit kind of gal. And so it's, I'm not someone who normally shows emotion. So for me to sit here crying sort of gives an insight into just how hard this was. But it's important to acknowledge that it was really hard. And I knew that I had to do this in a really different way because I could feel that it was taking me down. And so I knew that the only way that I was going to get through this was to ask for help.
Yeah.
And I'm not someone who normally asks for help. I'm the person that gives help. And so I knew that I had to be brave, and I had to, I have the privilege of working in the business that helps and supports people change lives.
And you do an incredible job of
and
it.
I'm really passionate about that.
Yeah.
But to long-winded answer your question, one of the things that's always kept me up at night is like the biggest piece of security piece for me has always been financial security. Like it's always been something that's like worried me incredibly. Like, will I be okay for retirement? You know, it's a lot of your financial kind of background harks to your parents. And, you know, my parents are, they're very financially kind of prudent. And I was like, am I going to be okay? So I knew that I needed that to navigate that, to know that I was going to be okay. And I just knew that I needed to draw on those areas of support and ask for help in ways that I've never asked for before. So I think that the reason I'm so passionate about sharing this journey is because I think there are so many people out there that can help you on that journey. And it's about knowing how to access that information and how to empower yourself in that process.
And that doesn't even need to be just financially, right? That can just be,
No.
that's not even the first thing. I guess you got on the plane not coming home to sort the money out, because that's probably the last thing on your mind at that point.
No, but for someone like me, it was one of the key things.
Yeah,
so
right,
I was
yeah.
trying to sort out the money. I was trying to sort out the whole kind of divorce logistics. And probably the hardest thing for me to acknowledge is that, I was also recommended to go and talk to someone, from a therapy point of view. And so it was working with all of those things hand in hand.
Plus you've got your daughter, her situation on top of all of this
absolutely,
too, right?
Absolutely.
There's a few plates being spun.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so there was a hell of a lot going on. But I had to, for the first time in my life, sort of say, hey, I'm not okay and I need help to get through this.
Yeah.
And I think that is, that's a really important piece to lean into, is that, where do you start in that process? And
well, that was going to be my next question, actually, was how do you prioritize? Like, what comes first? What comes second? What can wait? Sometimes having someone help you identify what the priorities are is super key. I know
absolutely
financially that's critical, because someone's going to go, if you've got debt, you get rid of that first. And then we can
absolutely.
talk about it. In this process, you need someone to go, well, let's just take a seat, put all the things out on the table and start to prioritize what comes first.
When you lose your marriage, there's that piece around losing you lose that piece around, like, you've lost your partner. For me, it was like losing my partner. It was like losing my life friend. We'd been together since we were 21.
Wow, yeah.
But also, it's all those dreams of the future. So it's all those things that you kind of thought that you would do.
Things you've been visualizing for a long time,
totally.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. So all those things that you'd worked really hard for are now off the map. And I think the other thing that's really, really hard as well is that, like, for me, my kids are my world, and all of a sudden I was staring down the barrel of like shared care. And so,
again, something you'd never seen
thought of
for you and your world, right?
Like, I was the PTA mum that did everything, and all of a sudden I was like, are you kidding me? I'm going to be seeing my kids week about. And I was like, how in goodness am I going to navigate this? It was like you can't begin to explain it until you've been through it. And that's why it's really important to talk about it, because it is like, it is the most horrendous thing to have to kind of navigate. And then I think the piece that's really important, and that's why, working with a divorce coach was so important to me, is that I spent hours and hours researching and kind of understanding what that was going to look like. But I was then trying to navigate that with someone who was like, I'm not happy. And I was like, what does it mean? I don't know. And then had actually not even undertaken any of the thoughts or consequences about
What's next?
Yeah. So there was me starting to think about, like, how does that mean about splitting up assets, splitting up childcare? And I had the privilege and insight of seeing situations where divorce had gone horribly wrong and had a financial ramification of $70,000, $100,000, $200,000 worth of, impact.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't have the interest or the appetite for that.
All the time.
And that's the important thing. It's the time. And so it's like, how do you navigate that? And as I say, having the complexities of having a child who was going through a lot of stuff as well at the same time, her well-being was kind of paramount to that process as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Cue friend of the podcast and lady with an incredible voice, divorce coach Bridgette from Equal Exes. You might remember Bridgette from season 1 when we hit the topic of divorce and what the costs can look like. Well, as it happens, Bridgette was the first port of call for Carla when she decided she was going to need some guidance through the process. I was keen to ask the question, how does it work? Do you just turn up at the office with a big divorce sign out the front or call 0800 divorce?
It's very different in terms of whether you're an initiator or a receiver of the information. And then obviously we've got the mutual when a couple both decides that they're going to separate. So it's very different. Being the receiver is incredibly difficult. And interestingly, in terms of the stats, it's more so, it's about 70% of women who actually initiate separations. So 30% men.
That's an interesting stat. I hadn't really considered it, but I assumed it was just 50-50. But why do you think that is?
I think women tend to deal, well, coming back to what you were saying before, I'm finding it more now that men are actually reaching out for help. But over the last number of years, men have very much wanted to be insular about it, and I don't need any support.
Yeah.
Whereas women also are very much in the frame of mind that I'm out of here. So the walk-away woman syndrome, they're sick of the changes not being made in terms of their relationship. So
Conversely, the men just kind of
put up with it. And
putting up the wall, bottling it, and just hoping that it'll fix itself or go away.
Absolutely, and not do anything in terms of the relationship, because two people have got to want to be in their relationship. There's been scenarios where men have come home and all of the furniture's gone and not realising that anything was actually wrong.
Like, I don't know if you've heard the studies, but the happiest people are single women and married men. And I think part of that is because, like, I kind of have looked into it a bit more, and it's like, I think a lot's changed as well. Like, it doesn't surprise me because I think that's that learning for me post-divorce, is that you realise just how much of it you were doing. Like, when you're going through it, you're sort of like, how will I cope? And then you realise actually you were doing the lion's share. So the days have gone where women were at home and that dynamic's shifted. So, women are equally now earning in the workforce. I mean, gender pay gaps is a whole other conversation in itself.
But the expectation is they're working a full-time job, but also still doing the domestic duties.
Yes. So
that's the invisible load we talk about.
That's the invisible load,
that's right.
yeah. And so I think, like, does it surprise me? Probably not, because I think probably the biggest learning for me out of it was that, I was like, how am I going? I said to you, like, my biggest fear was always around finances.
And I think conversely, obviously on the flip side, is that, a lot of men want 50-50 in terms of care of the children, but then realise, because they haven't been doing the lion's share of the work predominantly, how difficult it is, and end up, maybe potentially
get a bit of whiplash going, whoa,
this
is way harder than I thought.
Exactly. And so quite a few situations end up where they might have them every weekend or every second weekend rather than during the week time, because realising actually, this is a job in itself on top of another job, with
Yeah.
predominantly most females now obviously being in the workforce to a
It's
greater
hard enough
extent.
when everything's smooth sailing. Like
Correct.
it is a hard job
Correct.
being a
Yes,
parent. So-
absolutely.
And so when, Carla arrives at your I imagine this office and it just says divorces on the outside. I'm not quite sure that's
It's
how it
actually
works.
very much more sort of feng shui than that. It's actually quite
That's right. It's a
relaxing and
wellness centre,
homely.
actually.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So you turn up, you get your foot massage and your free herbal tea.
Well, you're welcome to after. Yeah, that's right.
Once you've taken stock of what Carla's situation is, what is the first sort of big step that had to be taken?
The first step in terms of is really unpacking what's gone on. So talking about the scenario with a real future focus in terms of that, and then making a plan in terms of what that looks like. Because I think, it is an incredibly overwhelming experience, and you don't know where to start, and you don't know where to turn. So
And you often don't know what the finish line is.
exactly,
right? Yeah.
exactly. And I've lost count of people saying, how long is this going to take? And unfortunately, I haven't got a crystal ball. But it's obviously one of the issues is going to be, one of the things is in terms of the way that you're both going to behave. Coming back to, you can only be responsible for your own actions and changing your own behaviour. You cannot be responsible for anybody else's.
And how often does the financial conversation come up, and it's not necessarily just the functional conversation about let's start to look at the assets and how we split those? How often does it become kind of weaponized and turn into a really nasty conversation?
Oh, it can turn to custard very quickly in terms of the finances, absolutely, and or the co-parenting or parallel parent, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Those are the two fundamental issues that obviously go hand in hand, that can end up, with the lawyers, lawyers led us backwards and forwards, litigation.
Which
cases sort of, spending millions of dollars.
Well, that's what I was going to say. People are fighting for the money, and they end up burning all the money on fighting for the money. Like
absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's the children who are massively affected through this process for years to come. If you're not able to, and in terms of our ethos, is separate with dignity. And it is very difficult, particularly if it hasn't been, it's still difficult anyway in terms of a mutual separation. But when one is the initiator, one's the receiver, there's a lot of emotional dysregulation there. And that's why, you talked about having a therapist, because that's not our role as a divorce coach, is to be your therapist. That's not our mandate. Is hand in hand working together with your D team to help you in all those different areas that you need to be able to move forward positively with. All right, because an amicable separation can very quickly become acrimonious, particularly as it relates to the children and all the finances.
And obviously, having Bridgette on your team, game changer. It's like having an Enable Me coach on your team, game changer.
Totally,
You've got someone to give you the perspective you need and start to draw that plan that you just had no sight of at the time, because you're in it. You can't see the wood for the trees. Were there any unexpected steps along the way that you were like, thank God Bridgette was here to help me deal with that?
I think the thing is that working with Bridgette, like we agreed to work with Bridgette's business together, and so we each had a coach.
Right.
So that's really good, and it would be the same if someone was to work with Enable Me. You'd each have a different coach,
Sure.
so your needs are kind of represented in that space, as opposed to someone trying to kind of keep you on both sides. So you've kind of got someone advocating for you.
For you and solely you, rather than someone trying to get them to play favourites.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I think that's advantageous. I think for me, I was very well prepared. And so if I'm honest, it was helpful having Equal Exes help prepare the other party, because they had kind of been focused on exiting, but actually didn't think about any of the consequences of exiting. So it was just kind of like, well, I want to leave the marriage, but then it was kind of like, well, what does that look like? And it was like, there was like, that's kind of where the therapist sort of helped a little bit, but it was like, his intentions were sort of like, oh, I'd like to go and live my best life. And then if you could just kind of continue on and do you, and I'll just pop in and out of that life as and when it suits. And I was kind of like, I don't really want to be benched in my own life, and I want to move on as well. But it was challenging because he was like, well, we could just be friends and I can still be involved in all your family and all this. And I was like, he needed to go on that journey with the team at Equal Exes to be kind of like, actually,
you can't have your cake and eat it too, buddy.
No, we always, in terms of, we don't give advice, we guide people. Our role is to be a thinking partner, sounding board as they go through the process, helping them avoid the mistakes, etc., and the pitfalls. And for us is we're very much about, you need to prepare. If you are the initiator of the separation, you actually need to prepare in terms of separating. What does that look like for you? You don't just go out there and say, "See ya, I'm off. That's it. Bye." There needs to be, coming back to wanting to keep it amicable, is in the first instance, obviously you need to work out, have a script. What does it look like in terms of the conversation that you're going to have with your partner? That's needs to be established, all right? There also needs to be, obviously your financials need to be organised. So, what do you own and owe? And unfortunately, still in our business, we're seeing 75% of women have no idea.
75 is staggering.
Mortgage, I don't even know what my partner earns, etc. So even,
maybe I'm so shocked because of what we've learned from doing an Enable Me course is open and honest conversations about money, weekly check-ins. We're both across every single number that there is. There's no hidden money, not that I'm aware of. But I've now rewired my brain for that to be normal for us. But without having met every other New Zealander, it's like,
I think the thing is that there is still, that ideal that she'll be right. And he or she, or whatever that looks like, will look after me. And I think too, particularly the main caregiver has been the one looking after the children, potentially obviously sacrificed their career, and haven't actually sat down and said, I actually need to know about the finances as well. A lot of, who's managing the finances, I ask that question a lot, obviously, and that can have massive ramifications, particularly if it's acrimonious, as you can imagine.
And people tend to think about the big things, so they're kind of like, the house or how you're going to split out that mortgage. But I think it's like we've been together for 25 years. So the amount of stuff that you have to do to break apart a life, it was almost like a job. And it was left to me to do that job entirely on my own.
While you also still have a job.
It was. I had a full-time job, and then I had a full-time job of deconstructing 25 years together, and a full-time job parenting our children, because I, as Bridgette said, I think the vision had been that we would do shared custody, but the custody fell 100% on me. So the work to do all of those things of changing, getting houses ready for sale, thinking about how to split assets, and then people don't even think about things like, if your KiwiSaver is different from their KiwiSaver, if your vehicle's worth more than their vehicle, those are some of the conversation that Bridgette kind of...
what is it valued at?
Yeah.
Whose name is it currently, and who's going to end up with... There's a whole...
And that's not the future. That's not the future. That's just... those pieces with Bridgette were the planning stages of how do you get out? They weren't the how do you move forward. They were just the how do you kind of finish this off.
For a clean
correct
separation.
So coming back to the conversation that you've got to have with your partner, if you are, coming back to the conversation we were having before, in terms of is what is that conversation going to look like? So we do a lot of role playing in terms of that. What are the logistics going to look like in terms of the children from an interim perspective? What are you going to talk to? What are you going to say to the children? Because divorce disclosure maintains that children want both parents at that conversation. That's just the start of it, really, in terms of all the things that need to be thought about. But the financial piece and the parenting is huge. And of course, one of the fundamentals is do not disparage each other to the children. You know.
This is a good reminder. Obviously, divorces keep you very busy, but it's a good reminder not to get divorced where possible.
Do you know what? I think the biggest thing is that have these conversations when you're in a good space.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. Who is going to be the main caregiver? Because, as we know, a piece that is very important in terms of divorce is that economic disparity. You know, so someone sacrificing their career to look after the family.
I need a breather after that. And now feels like a good time to get back into the reason for the pod, the money. Who better to talk to about money matters in a breakup than Enable Me founder Hannah McQueen? Not because she's had lots of breakups, but because as a financial coach, she's really seen it all. But before getting to the money stuff, I asked the question, how often do you see divorce situations turn up on the Enable Me doorsteps?
A little bit. I'd probably have a dozen cases a year, not necessarily starting with divorce, but starting with a form of financial trauma.
Yeah.
And divorce is probably the most common version of that, but losing jobs or someone getting sick and unable to work. There are sort of different forms, but divorce, it's not uncommon. Predominantly we'd see the female wanting to speak with us. Sometimes it's because they have no clue about anything. So it's like a quick, get me up to speed. I don't know what I need to do. Yeah. And for others like Carla, it was an opportunity to be considered, to maybe tag me in to help Carla make what potentially are the biggest financial decisions of her life, where her whole world and reference point has been blown apart.
Yep.
So you can tilt towards emotional reactions or responses to insulting suggestions from your partner, whether they're working with a divorce coach or not. You're like, whoa, where did that come from? And so you've got this person who is trusting you, who is very, very fragile, vulnerable, trying hard not to become bitter, trying really hard, and in that could over-index, this was my fear, to being more generous than what she should be in the name of, well, I'm trying not to be bitter and I'm trying to do it for the kids, and which often there is normally one spouse who takes more of the hits than the other. And perhaps that's because that's how the relationship's always been. So it's sort of a common way of that relation. It's almost a default mechanism. But when it comes to the point of you parting and financial security for someone who ultimately is also taking responsibility for the children, on paper it might not say that, but practically, it's high stakes. It's high stakes. And this person is trusting you in that vulnerability to hold them and take them on a journey so they can make bold decisions.
And what was the first step? What was the first step in your journey at this point?
The interesting thing is that I sort of knew that I would have to make some bold decisions, and I had often relied on my partner to kind of give me those courage to make decisions. So I was always nervous to spend money. Like, my natural propensity is to save rather than to spend. And all of a sudden I was looking down the barrel of like having to buy a house and get lending and do all of those sorts of things, which, like, on paper I understand all the maths and I can do it, but the courage to do it.
And you're doing it alone this time.
And doing it alone.
Yeah.
And also, like, as I had said, like, so much of like your background comes from your money, and the way you kind of act comes from kind of your upbringing. And so, you know, my parents are amazing support, but highly conservative. And so I knew that, you know, I needed to act and be bold, but I knew that I needed people that could kind of help me on that journey, but who would have the credibility to make me make those decisions.
Yeah.
And so some of those decisions would be along the lines of, you know, you can sit on paper and sort of be, well, I can drag this out. Like, one of the decisions was I'd stayed in the family home, And it was like, at what point do you kind of just get out of the family home and buy a home? So, for me, it was really brave because I found a new home and it was exactly what I was looking for. And the location was really perfect because it was in the streets that I'd kind of grown up in, really near my parents.
Oh, amazing.
And it felt like home as soon as I went in. But I had to take the courage and kind of buy that place before I'd even sold my family home.
And for someone who's risk averse, that is bold. So those are huge steps to take.
I was literally like, I can't believe I'm doing this. But yeah, that's where I needed like the coaching and someone that could take me through the numbers. And
Before that, though, there were two quite big discussion points we had, which was the first one, what does your life look like on one income? Yes. Especially if you're going to be essentially responsible for the kids' costs.
Yeah.
And so instinctively, Karla knew that, well, like, sure, on paper, I think I should be able to manage that. But often you're blurry-eyed, right? You're not sure if you've missed something. And so the first step was, let's just go through to affirm to you that you're going to be okay, because there's a sense of catastrophe with it, financial catastrophe. So I guess calming that. And then the next question, and it's the most common question. So you build your scenario of what does it look like? What's my new norm, financial norm? Is there money left over? And what am I going to do with that money? So establishing that. Now, some people at that point find they don't have enough money to make it work. So then they become reliant on the partner for child support. And that's not a bad thing. I hate being reliant on someone else, especially when that person has demonstrated that they can make pretty selfish decisions in the heat of the moment, right? So it was nice to build a plan that didn't require a reliance on your partner. Of course, it was appropriate for him to pay child support, but that was the first thing.
But it's not; those aren't the foundations, the building blocks of it.
No, absolutely.
It's a nice to have. It's not a need to have.
Yeah. So that was great. So that sort of, we almost took back some control, and it gave us some peace, didn't it?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then the next thing was had the discussion around, should I stay in the family home or not? And one of Karla's great points is she can be quite objective in the moment. She can assess things and not necessarily emotional. Now, a lot of people I find, especially the females, the mums, they want to stay in the family home. That's the deal breaker. The most common phrase I get is, it gives consistency for the kids.
The kids grew up there.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. I'm thinking the kids probably had a whole lot of trauma there based on what's also happened as well. But but we have that romance. And as a mum, I totally understand that. But from a financial perspective, that usually means you've got to buy your partner out of the house. And usually that is the single worst decision you can make financially, because
it's money that has just gone,
and it's on an unproductive asset, and all you've done is created a huge mortgage, and you're now the sole person responsible for that. Your ability to make progress from there is almost impossible. And so I have these conversations with clients, and the great thing when I was speaking to Karla about this, which was a credit to her amongst all this noise, was she could see that. She understood that. For her, it was, no, I don't want to do that. I want a fresh start. So a really healthy way of looking at it, but could also see the financially that was going to free her up long term as well. Because it meant that when they were able to sell the family home, that you could start again with a clean slate. Do you remember when the house was for sale? It was the open homes, and there was a flood or something, and you were having to clean and drain. The ex was nowhere to be seen, and it sort of sealed your fate as, I'm never going to do repairs and maintenance again. So all these things kind of
lead. The next door neighbour was a drain layer, and he was out there with me.
But you would have been standing there swearing at the house.
I know. And it was also like, I had to be the face of the separation, and then it's like and then people were sort of like, oh, you're so sad about leaving that really big house. Everyone wants the goss at that point, and it's like, how are you going to feel like moving out from your big house, and how do you feel moving into a smaller house? And I was just kind of like, none of that stuff defines me.
And it was the least of your worries.
It was the least of my worries, you know?
Right. You want to make sure that your daughter's under control.
Yeah, and it was just like, a home is a home. Yeah. And but it was really interesting. And I think the piece I found really interesting is that, to start with, I was like horrified the way people were so kind of pervasive into my life. But then I kind of realized that people were asking the questions because, just like money, relationships is another thing we don't talk about. Yep. And so much of this is going on behind closed doors, and people are asking you because they want to know if it's normal.
And another reminder too that we're constantly seeing it happen to other people, but this time it is happening to you, and this is what happens to everyone in this situation too. You're not alone in people trying to peer in and get an understanding of what's going on.
And we see the best of everybody else's lives, of course. And so we kind of go, when the worst of somebody else's life is playing out, we want to kind of understand it because we know that that's closer to our lives than the best of it. It's kind of a bit the same with finances.
Yeah.
We see the best of everybody's financial kind of life and their house and their car and all the rest of it, but we don't really know who's paying for that or who owns it.
Absolutely. The Instagram life is not the reality. Yeah.
I think because Karla knew that she could manage financially without her partner and worked to a budget and was really diligent in sticking to that, but had the certainty that she's got this. It's provided we hold the job, we're going to be okay.
Yeah. Was there an element on top of we got this, also a little bit of a, like, I've got this?
No. Not at that point.
Not at that point. I was like, I felt like a version of Shortland Street where people were like, holy shit, like what else is going on?
You're in the eye of the storm.
I was in the eye of the storm. Like it was kind of, people sometimes speak to me now. I think I think the best thing I can say to you, right, is that I've always been a planner from A to Z for planning for every catastrophe. So I
because you've run every single catastrophe out in your head already.
Everything. So I am like anxiety with capital A. But the thing is that when the one thing that you never planned for happens in your life and you don't just survive it, you thrive through that process. You don't come back and just kind of go, fuck you. You kind of go, actually.
Thank you.
You just kind of go, release. And I don't worry in the way I used to.
Like, you're in control of it completely.
Yeah, and so the funniest thing is that it ended up being the most cathartic thing that ever happened in my life because my kids will tell you I'm a completely different person now, a completely different mother. A lot of people now just say to me, like, you're so softer, you're so much gentler.
This is the gentle version.
Wow.
I know.
Imagine.
I used to be like so rigid and hard because I was just stressed all the time, and being in that relationship and carrying all those pressures made me like that. And it's just like, it's like I just don't worry about stuff like I used to, even money.
But can I just dissect a couple more things for you? So because those fundamentals were sorted, I can survive on a day-to-day basis. I know where I'm going to live. I've found where I'm going to live. Because that was done, that gave Karla the capacity to negotiate. She wasn't in an emotional state that because they were where they needed to go. She could negotiate appropriately for the rest of the assets and with a clear head. Yeah. And did very well, and it was the outcome was appropriate. But too often, I see it weighted in someone else's favour because someone is desperate in that process. There was no desperation, which was a credit to Karla because she had got those fundamentals sorted. But so that was great. Then the next challenge for Karla, so she got the fundamentals sorted, and because she lived and lives small, she's a saver, really kind of keeps her money tight and is strangely generous, but on herself is quite tight. If she kept doing that, she would be okay for retirement based on, if she did that for the next kind of 10, 15 years, she was going to be okay. She would need to invest those savings well, but she was going to be okay. Yeah. But the challenge for Karla, because of this complete sideswipe from her ex to even be in this situation, they had shared goals of being able to provide for their daughters financially, to help them up onto the property ladder and all of those things. And the ex had demonstrated that, well, we don't even know if we can rely on you to contribute to any of these things. I mean, your lip service says that you're still invested, but your actions don't say that. Yeah. So Karla's taken on this responsibility of, well, I don't want to compromise my kid's financial future. If he's on board, great, but if he's not, I still want my kids to have the life and the opportunity that they would have other had.
You're on board, you're not, I don't care, we're forging ahead regardless.
Exactly, but that has meant she's had to change her money mindset, because she said at the start she was very conservative with money, doesn't want to spend, doesn't really want to invest. In order to not compromise on that goal.
You're taking some risks now.
And that's the journey, the arc that she's gone on, and it's been it's been beautiful to see, and she deserves the success that she gets. She has fought for it, and I think you've come out of the eye of the storm, and you're a great example to your girls. It's awesome.
And now, do you feel the feeling of momentum in terms of, moving forward?
Yeah,
You've got investments ticking away now.
Yeah, and I think it's also like, I think the greatest gift you can kind of have in this process is to be able to move forward and to be able to craft a life that is yours. And probably the greatest gift for me is, being able to help other women and also raise two beautiful women who have a lot of financial nous about them, even though they're two young girls. Like, I think what it became about was, how do I become the person that my children can be proud of? Yeah. They're never too young though. For financial nous, there's no such thing as too young. Oh,
right?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I'm really proud of them. And as I say, it's not a journey I would have wanted to go on. But it's why I've come to sort of share it today, because, there's still parts of it that are a little bit raw. But in essence, I'm good. There's a positive side to the end of the story. And I think that's, I think the key takeaways would be that you need to get the right help that can make the difference between kind of surviving and thriving.
Yeah.
And that has definitely been a huge, huge impact for me. Having Bridgette help, not just me, but help my ex kind of transition through it so we could move through it. I think, having that financial support was really important as well. And I think also the piece is being the person that was on the receiving end of it. You don't really want to deal with it, but having those people around me, they pushed me through the journey when I didn't. Like, I'm a very action-oriented person, but on this scenario, I was kind of acting, but I was like, well, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe it's not going to happen. And I was just kind of going through the motions. But if there's one thing that I would say, I was getting advice from Hannah and others, which is you have to just move on and you have to get it done. And it's completely right, because the person that I was dealing with in the first year was probably a little bit remorseful. The person 3 years on, they've moved on. And if you let this thing drag on, the worse your outcome's going to be.
Yeah, and it's going to cost you not just financially, but
mentally.
You'll burn out.
Yeah, and knowing people that have let assets and stuff drag on for 3-5 years, you end up financially and mentally a lot worse off.
Yeah.
So, although you don't want to deal with it, you've got to just get on and deal with it.
Big thanks, as always, to our guests, Karla and Hannah from Enable Me, particularly Karla for being so vulnerable and sharing her story. And of course, cheers to Bridgette from Equal Exes. If you're on the hunt for a divorce coach, she's the one to call. If you like the pod or you want to give us some feedback or reviews, get in touch, because we do love hearing from you. At Where's My Money NZ is where we are on Instagram. Flick us a DM and let's get chatting. In the next episode, I meet Roger. He's done what we all dream of. Maybe not all of us, but I'm damn keen. He retired early.
A lot of people go, oh yeah, I need to have so many rental properties and I need to, $10 million or whatever. But I think the big thing is to work backwards.
We're talking retirement. And man, we need to get our collective asses together when it comes to getting organised to retire one day in New Zealand. I'll see you in the next episode, where I'll continue to ask the question, where's my money?